fall for that old trick.
The Andy Griffith Show gave us 8 seasons of warmth, laughter, and characters who felt like family. We watched Mayberry grow and change season after season, but not everyone stayed until the end. Some familiar faces simply vanished from the show without a word of explanation, leaving longtime viewers wondering what happened to the people they'd grown to love. Today, we're looking back at 10 Andy Griffith characters that mysteriously disappeared without saying goodbye. Number 10, Ellie Walker, played by Eleanor Donahue.
Baby.
Barney Fife, have you been drinking?
When the Andy Griffith Show premiered in 1960, Ellie Walker was supposed to be an important part of Mayberry. She ran the drugstore and brought a modern, independent spirit to town. Ellie had a college education and strong opinions, which made her different from most women on television at the time. The show seemed to be setting up a romance between her and Andy, with their relationship developing over those first dozen episodes. The character of Ellie represented something new for Mayberry. She wasn't afraid to challenge Andy's thinking, and their conversations often centered on her more progressive views versus his traditional small-town sensibilities. This created an interesting dynamic that the show's writers seemed eager to explore. Ellie would offer medical advice from behind the drugstore counter, getting involved in various town situations, and establishing herself as a caring member of the community. Eleanor Donahue had just come off a successful run on Father Knows Best, so her casting seemed perfect. She was an experienced television actress who understood comedy timing and how to work within an ensemble cast. The producers clearly had high hopes for her character, giving her substantial screen time and important storylines in those early episodes, but something wasn't working behind the scenes. Donahue later admitted she felt uncomfortable in the role and struggled to find chemistry with Andy Griffith. The atmosphere on set was difficult for her, and she asked to be released from her contract. She spoke about feeling out of place and never quite finding her footing with the character, despite her best efforts. After just 12 episodes, Ellie simply stopped appearing. There was no farewell episode, no explanation given to viewers about where she went or why she left. One week she was there, the next week she wasn't. The drugstore continued to exist in Mayberry, but Ellie was never mentioned again. The show moved forward as if she'd never existed, and Andy's romantic life took a completely different direction. For viewers who'd been following Ellie's story and invested in seeing where her relationship with Andy might lead, her disappearance must have been jarring and confusing. Number 9, Frank Meyers, played by Jack Prince.
I honestly believe I'd rather spend another 10 days in jail than to wear these government clothes.
Frank Meyers was Mayberry's fix-it man, appearing in several episodes during the show's early years. He had a memorable way of speaking and a distinct personality that made him stand out. Frank would show up to repair things around town, often getting involved in whatever situation Andy and Barney found themselves dealing with that week. His particular way with words and his methodical approach to fixing things made him memorable, even in relatively small roles. Jack Prince brought a quirky energy to the role, and Frank Meyers became one of those recurring characters who added flavor to Mayberry's community. He appeared in episodes during the first 2 seasons, creating a presence that suggested he'd be around for the long haul. The show seemed to be establishing him as one of those reliable background characters that every small town has, the kind of person everyone knows and calls when something needs fixing. Frank had a distinctive manner of speaking that made even mundane conversations about repairs entertaining. He'd explain what was wrong with something in careful detail, often while Andy and Barney were trying to focus on other matters. This created gentle comedy without making Frank the butt of jokes. He was competent at his job and took pride in his work, which made him a respectable member of the community. But Frank Meyers disappeared without any explanation. The show simply stopped using the character, and viewers never learned why the town's handyman was no longer around. There was no replacement character who took over his duties, no mention of Frank moving away or retiring from the fix-it business. He was there, and then he wasn't, leaving a small but noticeable gap in Mayberry's roster of familiar faces. When things needed repairing in later episodes, other characters would handle it, or it would happen off-screen, but Frank was never mentioned again. Number 8, Emma Watson, played by Cheerio Meredith.
All the same, I think there's more to this than meets the eye.
Emma Watson served as Mayberry's town nurse and appeared in several episodes during the show's run. She worked closely with the town's medical needs and often crossed paths with Andy in her professional capacity. Emma was a warm, caring character who represented the kind of community-minded person that made Mayberry feel real. In a small town like Mayberry, the local nurse would be someone everyone knew and trusted, someone who'd been taking care of the community for years. Cheerio Meredith, who played Emma, brought a gentle competence to the role. Her character wasn't flashy or comedic, but she added depth to the town's supporting cast. Emma appeared regularly enough that viewers came to expect seeing her when medical matters arose in Mayberry. She represented the kind of steady, reliable presence that small towns depend on, someone who'd been part of the community fabric for so long that nobody could imagine the town without her. Emma would appear in episodes dealing with health concerns, accidents, or any time someone in Mayberry needed medical attention. She worked efficiently and professionally, offering comfort and care to whoever needed it. The character helped ground the show in reality, reminding viewers that even in a gentle place like Mayberry, people sometimes got sick or hurt and needed looking after. Then Emma Watson simply stopped appearing on the show. There was no final episode, no storyline explaining her absence. The character vanished from Mayberry without a trace, and when medical situations came up in later episodes, other characters filled those roles or the medical aspects were handled differently. For a town as small as Mayberry, losing your nurse without explanation seems like something people would talk about, but the show never addressed it. Emma was simply gone, and Mayberry's medical needs were handled in other ways without any acknowledgement that things had changed. Number 7. Thelma Lou, played by Betty Lynn.
You did!
Yes, and I'll do it again.
Thelma Lou holds a special place in the hearts of Andy Griffith Show fans as Barney Fife's sweetheart. Betty Lynn played her with warmth and patience, creating one of television's most endearing couples. For 5 seasons, Thelma Lou was a regular presence, usually appearing when Barney's romantic side came out, or when the show needed a double date scenario with Andy and whoever he was seeing at the time. Thelma Lou's relationship with Barney was sweet and genuine. She put up with his insecurities, his need to prove himself, and his sometimes inflated sense of his own importance with remarkable grace. Barney would often mess up their dates or create unnecessary drama, and Thelma Lou would gently guide him back to reality. Their relationship felt authentic, built on real affection despite Barney's various quirks and anxieties. The character appeared in many memorable episodes, from double dates to town events to quiet evenings on her porch. She had her own personality beyond just being Barney's girlfriend. Thelma Lou had friends in town, her own opinions, and a life that existed whether Barney was around or not. This made her feel like a real person rather than just a plot device. But when Don Knotts left the show at the end of season 5, Thelma Lou disappeared too. The show never addressed what happened to her. Did she and Barney break up when he left town? Did she move away from Mayberry herself? Did their relationship end badly, or did it just fade away? Viewers were left completely in the dark about the fate of a character they'd grown to love over 5 seasons. The absence was particularly strange because the show continued for 3 more seasons, and Mayberry kept going without one of its most beloved residents. Nobody mentioned Thelma Lou, nobody wondered where she'd gone, nobody seemed to notice that she was missing. It wasn't until the 1986 reunion movie Return to Mayberry that fans finally got closure, learning that Barney and Thelma Lou had eventually married. But for those watching in the 1960s, her unexplained disappearance after being such a fixture in Mayberry life was unsettling. Betty Lynn later said she would have loved to continue on the show, but once Don Knotts left, nobody thought to keep Thelma Lou around, even though her character had connections to Mayberry beyond just Barney. Number 6. Otis Campbell, played by Hal Smith.
The gun. Oh, the gun. Why did you say so?
Otis Campbell, Mayberry's lovable town drunk, was one of the show's most memorable recurring characters. Hal Smith played him with such charm that Otis became endearing rather than pathetic. He'd let himself into the courthouse jail cell to sleep off his drinking, and his interactions with Andy and Barney provided some of the show's gentler humor. Otis knew the routine so well that he'd come in, get the keys, lock himself up, and make himself comfortable without bothering anyone. The character worked because the show treated Otis with kindness rather than mockery. He wasn't a danger to himself or others, just a man with a drinking problem who the town looked after in their own way. Andy's approach to Otis showed the sheriff's compassionate side, understanding that punishment wouldn't help Otis and that sometimes people just needed a safe place to be. Otis appeared regularly from season 2 through most of the show's run, becoming as much a part of Mayberry as Floyd's barbershop. His presence was so consistent that it felt like he'd always be there, stumbling into the courthouse with his familiar routine. He'd have conversations with Andy about his life, his wife, and his struggles, adding depth to what could have been just a one-note comedy character. Hal Smith brought dignity to the role, making Otis a real person dealing with a real problem in a small town that cared about him. The episodes featuring Otis often had a gentle sadness underneath the humor, acknowledging that alcoholism was serious even as they kept the tone light. But Otis disappeared in the show's final seasons. The network was becoming more conscious of how they portrayed alcohol use on television, and the decision was made to stop featuring a character whose main trait was drunkenness, even a harmless one. This reflected changing attitudes in American society about how such issues should be handled on family television. Otis simply stopped appearing, with no explanation given within the show's storyline. There was no moment where Andy mentioned Otis getting sober, or moving away, or even passing away. There was no farewell, no acknowledgement of his absence. The character who'd been a fixture for years just vanished, and Mayberry continued without him. The jail cell that Otis had occupied so many times remained empty, but nobody mentioned why. Hal Smith later appeared in different roles on the show, but Otis Campbell was gone for good, his story left unfinished. Number 5. Peggy McMillan, played by Joanna Moore.
Oh, hi, Peg.
Oh, and?
Well, my timing was a little off.
Peggy McMillan entered Andy's life during season 3 and seemed like she might be the one. Joanna Moore played her with a natural warmth, and the chemistry between her and Andy Griffith felt genuine. Peggy had a son named Joey, which added a ready-made family dynamic that the show explored in several episodes. The idea of Andy becoming a husband and stepfather created interesting storytelling possibilities. The relationship developed over the course of several episodes, with Peggy becoming a significant part of Andy's personal life. She appeared in enough episodes that viewers invested in seeing where this romance would lead. Peggy wasn't just another pretty face passing through Mayberry. She had substance, her own opinions, and the kind of independence that suggested she could be a real partner for Andy. The show seemed to be building towards something serious between them. Episodes featured Andy spending time with both Peggy and Joey, navigating the challenges of dating someone with a child. Opie's interactions with Peggy and Joey added another layer, showing how the relationship affected Andy's son and what it might mean for their family. Joanna Moore brought warmth and authenticity to every scene. Her Peggy felt like someone who belonged in Mayberry, someone who understood small-town life and could fit into Andy's world. The relationship felt more substantial than some of Andy's other romantic interests, which made it seem like the show was setting up something long-term. Then Peggy simply stopped appearing. There was no breakup episode, no explanation for where she went or why the relationship ended. One week she was there, seemingly an important part of Andy's life, and the next week she was gone without a trace. Joanna Moore's personal struggles may have played a role in her departure from the show, but viewers were left without any closure whatsoever. Andy moved on to other romantic interests in subsequent episodes, and Peggy McMillan became another woman who'd been important to Andy Taylor, and then vanished from his life without explanation. The show's habit of making Andy's girlfriends disappear without explanation became a pattern that longtime viewers couldn't help but notice. It made Andy's romantic life feel unstable, and left audiences wondering if any relationship on the show would ever have a proper ending. Number 4. Helen Crump, played by Annetta Corsaw.
Well, no, I'm not. I had Jane Marcus over for dinner and we got talking and I didn't...
Now, Helen Crump eventually became Andy's wife, but there's an interesting disappearance in her story that often gets overlooked. When Annetta Corsaw first appeared as Opie's schoolteacher in season 3, she made several appearances and seemed to be developing into a regular character. Helen was intelligent, independent, and could hold her own with Andy in ways that other women on the show sometimes couldn't. In those early appearances, Helen showed herself to be a dedicated teacher who cared about her students and wasn't afraid to stand up to Andy when it came to Opie's education. She had had strong opinions about teaching methods and child development, and she expressed them clearly. The chemistry between Helen and Andy was evident from the start, with their conversations showing mutual respect and genuine interest in each other. The show seemed to be establishing Helen as more than just another romantic interest for Andy. She was a professional woman with her own career and her own place in the Mayberry community. Her role as Opie's teacher gave her a natural connection to Andy's life beyond just dating, which suggested the writers were thinking long-term about this character. After those initial appearances, Helen Crump vanished from the show for an entire season. She simply stopped being mentioned, and Opie's school life went on without any reference to her. Episodes that dealt with Opie's education featured other teachers or handled school matters differently. It was as if those early episodes featuring Helen never happened, and she'd been erased from Mayberry entirely. Then, in season 5, Helen returned to the show and picked up where things left off, eventually becoming Andy's primary love interest and the woman he'd marry. The show acted as though she'd been around all along, making no mention of her absence or why she'd been gone. Helen and Andy's relationship developed seriously from that point forward, leading to their eventual marriage. But that gap in the middle has always been curious. The show never explained where Helen went or why she wasn't around during that 4th season. For viewers watching in real time, it must have seemed like yet another of Andy's relationships that just faded away without explanation, until Helen unexpectedly returned and the show continued as if nothing unusual had happened. The mysterious absence of a character who would eventually become so important to the show's final seasons remains one of the more puzzling disappearances in Mayberry history. Number 3. Barney Fife, played by Don Knotts, main run.
Would you like to hear how this whole crazy thing got started? Well, Thelma Lou called me and said she'd like to play bridge tonight.
Don Knotts as Barney Fife was the heart of the Andy Griffith Show for many fans. His nervous energy, misplaced confidence, and deep friendship with Andy created some of television's most beloved moments. Barney wasn't just a character, he was essential to what made the show special. His single bullet in his shirt pocket, his romantic troubles, his desire to be a big city detective while working in sleepy Mayberry, all of these elements came together to create something truly memorable. The relationship between Andy and Barney was built on years of friendship. They'd grown up together in Mayberry, knew each other's families, and shared a history that went back to childhood. This foundation made their interactions feel authentic. Andy protected Barney from his own worst impulses while still letting him maintain his dignity. Barney looked up to Andy while also sometimes resenting being in his shadow. Don Knotts won 5 Emmy Awards for playing Barney Fife, which gives you some idea of how beloved the character was. His physical comedy, his timing, and his ability to make Barney simultaneously ridiculous and sympathetic made him irreplaceable. When Don Knotts decided to leave after season 5 to pursue a film career, it created a huge void in Mayberry. The show tried to explain Barney's absence by saying he'd taken a job elsewhere, but the explanation was brief and didn't match the importance of the character. A few lines of dialogue about Barney moving to Raleigh didn't feel adequate for someone who'd been such a central part of the show. Barney appeared in a few guest appearances in later seasons, which were always highlights, but his departure as a regular cast member fundamentally changed the show's dynamic. The courthouse scenes felt empty without him. Andy had nobody to play off of in the same way. What made this disappearance particularly striking was that Andy and Barney's friendship was the show's foundation. They were more than just sheriff and deputy. They were best friends who'd known each other since childhood. For Barney to leave Mayberry permanently seemed out of character, and while the show continued with quality episodes, something vital was missing. The show tried various replacement deputies, including Warren Ferguson, played by Jack Burns, but none could fill the space Barney left behind. It wasn't the actors' fault. They were playing different characters who had to establish themselves from scratch. But viewers had 5 seasons of history with Barney, and no newcomer could compete with that. His departure wasn't as abrupt as some other characters, but the lack of a proper farewell storyline that matched the character's importance left fans feeling like they'd lost something irreplaceable. Number 2. Emma Brand, played by various actresses.
Emma, how's your sciatica?
Oh, it's fine, just fine.
Emma Brand was mentioned multiple times throughout the show's run as one of Mayberry's elderly residents. She appeared in a handful of episodes, usually as background or in minor roles that highlighted the town's community nature. Different actresses played her over the years, which wasn't unusual for such a minor character. What's interesting about Emma Brand is that she represented the type of continuity the show usually maintained quite well. Mayberry felt real because characters like Emma existed in the background, mentioned in conversations, and occasionally seen around town. These minor characters helped create the sense that Mayberry was a complete community, not just a handful of main characters performing in front of empty streets. Emma Brand would be mentioned when characters talked about church activities, town events, or just general gossip about what was happening in Mayberry. She represented the older generation of the town, the people who'd been there for decades and knew everyone's history. The show's attention to these small details is part of what made it special. Minor characters like Emma Brand might only appear briefly or be mentioned in passing, but their existence suggested a whole world beyond what we saw on screen. It made viewers feel like they were visiting a real place where life continued even when the cameras weren't rolling. But like many of the show's supporting players, Emma Brand eventually disappeared without explanation. The show stopped mentioning her, and she faded from Mayberry's landscape. It's a small detail that most viewers probably didn't notice, especially since she was never a major presence. But it represents how the show's world quietly changed over time. Characters who'd been part of the town's fabric simply ceased to exist, with no acknowledgement of their absence. Number 1. Mayor Pike, played by Dick Elliott.
Miss Williamson writes for the newspaper over at the state capitol.
Perhaps you read my column, Meandering with
Mayor Pike was Mayberry's well-meaning but often ineffectual mayor during the show's early seasons. Dick Elliott played him as a friendly, slightly bumbling politician who relied heavily on Andy's judgment. The mayor appeared regularly enough to become a familiar face, representing Mayberry's local government in various episodes. He was the kind of small-town mayor you might find anywhere in America, more concerned with keeping everyone happy than with wielding political power. Mayor Pike's relationship with Andy was warm and respectful, with the mayor often seeking Andy's advice on town matters. He understood that Andy had his finger on the pulse of Mayberry in ways that he, as mayor, sometimes didn't. This created a nice dynamic where the elected official deferred to the appointed sheriff on many issues, recognizing Andy's wisdom and connection to the community. The character provided opportunities for storylines about local politics and community decisions, adding another layer to Mayberry's civic life. Episodes featuring Mayor Pike would deal with town budgets, community projects, visiting dignitaries, or local controversies that needed the mayor's attention. He represented the administrative side of running a small town, showing that even a peaceful place like Mayberry had governmental needs. Dick Elliott brought a gentle, grandfatherly quality to Mayor Pike. He wasn't a buffoon or a corrupt politician. He was simply a man trying to do his best in a job that sometimes overwhelmed him. His reliance on Andy wasn't weakness but wisdom, recognizing that good leadership sometimes means listening to those who know better. Then Mayor Pike disappeared, and the show introduced a new mayor, Mayor Stoner. There was no election episode, no storyline about Mayor Pike retiring or deciding not to run for re-election. He simply stopped appearing, and the new mayor took his place as if he'd always been there. Later, the show introduced yet another mayor, continuing the pattern of mayoral replacements without explanation. For viewers who'd gotten used to Mayor Pike, his unexplained absence was another reminder that Mayberry, despite feeling like a real place, was ultimately a television show where characters came and went based on production decisions rather than logical story reasons. The show's tendency to replace, rather than explain, became particularly noticeable with the revolving door of mayors, as if Mayberry couldn't hold on to elected officials for more than a season or two at a time. The Andy Griffith Show remains beloved precisely because Mayberry felt like a real place populated by people we knew and cared about. That's what makes these disappearances so noticeable when we look back. In real life, people move away, relationships end, and communities change, but usually with goodbyes and explanations. The show's habit of letting characters vanish without closure reminds us that television production in the 1960s operated differently than it does today. Contracts ended, actors left for other opportunities, and creative decisions were made without worrying too much about tying up every loose end. The show's writers focused on moving forward rather than explaining every absence. They were producing 30-plus episodes a year, working under tight schedules and budgets, and sometimes explaining every character departure just wasn't a priority. For modern viewers used to carefully plotted storylines and character arcs, these unexplained disappearances stand out. Today's television shows plan their seasons in advance, write characters out properly when actors leave, and maintain continuity as a priority. But The Andy Griffith Show was made in an era when episodic television was more about individual stories than ongoing narratives. Yet somehow, The Andy Griffith Show survived all these comings and goings. New characters filled the spaces left behind, and the show maintained its warm, gentle spirit through 8 successful seasons. When Ellie Walker disappeared, other women entered Andy's life. When Barney left, other deputies arrived. When Mayor Pike vanished, a new mayor took office. Mayberry kept being Mayberry, even as familiar faces disappeared and new ones arrived. The essence of the show remained constant, even as the cast changed. Floyd kept cutting hair, Aunt Bee kept cooking, and Andy kept solving Mayberry's problems with wisdom and kindness. These missing characters remind us that even in a place as seemingly permanent as Mayberry, change was constant. People came into Andy's life and left it, sometimes without explanation. The town moved forward, and so did the show. Maybe that's more realistic than we'd like to admit, even if we wish those departures had been handled differently. Still, for fans who loved these characters, the lack of closure stings. We wanted to know what happened to Ellie, whether Thelma Lou was happy, why Peggy left. These characters mattered to us, and their unexplained absences left holes in the fabric of Mayberry that we noticed, even if the show itself moved on. The Andy Griffith Show gave us 8 wonderful seasons of entertainment, and these missing characters are just a small part of its story. They remind us why we loved the show in the first place, because these characters felt real enough that their disappearances mattered to us. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, remembering these departed Mayberry residents, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more nostalgic looks at classic television. What character's disappearance from The Andy Griffith Show surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below.